Bună seara din Chișinău, Moldova. The Schengen area is something that often confuses many people from outside of Europe and indeed many Europeans as well. So what is it? What countries are in it? Will it affect you if you want to come and stay for a short term or a long term here in Europe? I'm actually not in the Schengen area right now because Moldova is not a member, but up the road is Romania. Actually, I think it's going to be this way is going to be Romania, and that is a member of Schengen and recently became a member of Schengen. They've also got an Arc de Triomphe, by the way, not just Chișinău, Bucharest and Paris. Obviously the famous one is there. So I used to work at the EU institutions as a lawyer, so I am in a good position to advise you about the idiosyncrasies of Schengen and what it's all about. So let's get into this video. The original agreement to the Schengen area was signed all the way back in 1985, and it was signed near a village in Luxembourg called Schengen, hence the name. Normally use the pronunciation Schengen in English. You will hear lots of other variations in that pronunciation. However, Schengen is the most common that we use. Now, it's an agreement on having a common travel area with a common visa. So, whilst the boundaries of the Schengen area correspond very closely to those of the European Union, they are not exactly the same thing, so you need to understand some significant nuances. For example, there are currently, in August 2025, 2 countries that are members of the European Union but are not in the Schengen area, and those are Cyprus and the Republic of Ireland, my home country. However, there are a few countries that are not at the moment in the European Union, but are in the Schengen area. Those would be Liechtenstein, Iceland, Norway, and Switzerland, those 4. Plus there are some microstates in Europe, like San Marino and Monaco, for example, that are also not in the European Union, but they have these open or semi-open borders with the European Union. So those countries are de facto in Schengen, but not de jure. So they're just in reality part of it in practice, but not legally parties to the agreement. On top of that, there are some parts of the European Union, like for example French Guiana or Guyane, that are not in the Schengen area. They tend to be far away from the European continent, so you have also some territories that belong to the Netherlands or to Norway, which is not in the European Union but is a party to the Schengen agreement, and that is not counted as being in the Schengen area. So you need to be aware of some of the nuances if you're going to travel a little bit off the beaten track. But for most people, they're going to be sticking to those countries that are part of the European Union. And you need to know that Ireland and Cyprus are not members, but Norway, Liechtenstein, Iceland, and Switzerland are in fact part of the Schengen area. So what rights do you have if you are not an EU citizen? Because if you're an EU citizen, it's pretty straightforward. You can go and live anywhere else in the European Union. You can work there, you can travel there. So you basically have, for all intents and purposes, the same rights as someone who is, say, a citizen of that member state you're going to. So for example, if you are French and you go to Germany, then basically you can go and live there and travel without any restrictions in principle. However, if you're from a country like the US or Canada or the United Kingdom, since Brexit, since they left the European Union, then you are restricted to visa-free 90 days every 180. You may have a nationality that does not grant you visa-free access to the Schengen area. Then you would need to go and get a tourist visa if you wanted to come as a tourist. But in principle, you can come as a tourist if you're American or British or Canadian, Australian, New Zealander, and come and do that in the Schengen area and not worry about it too much if you are a tourist and only staying for less than 90 days every 180. So the external border of the Schengen is a hard border, whilst the internal borders don't have any permanent passport controls or custom controls. So for example, in principle, if you are going from, say, Poland to Lithuania, then you would just cross the border, and it would be a bit like being in, say, the US, where you cross straight lines. There would not be any passport control or customs control, and not expect to see the police there. However, there are provisions as part of the agreements on Schengen to have temporary controls in certain situations. So, for example, I actually have been stopped on the border between Lithuania going into Poland, where there was a passport control by the Polish authorities, and some of these temporary passport controls or customs controls, they actually become rather semi-permanent, and they are definitely not really temporary. However, that is another nuance, so you would want to go and read up on that depending on where you're watching this video to understand whether they're going to be border controls. They also introduced them between Germany and Poland pretty recently. However, in principle, you should be able to cross unmolested by the authorities when you go from one member of Schengen to another. And if you have, say, a visa for or residency in the Schengen, one member state of Schengen, then you can also travel to the other parts of it with some minor restrictions on the amount of time you're allowed to spend outside of the country that grants you residency. I'll get into that in a few moments in the video about solutions to when you want to come and hang out in the Schengen area for a period that is longer than being a tourist. So you have 90 days every 180, so basically 3 months every 6 months, visa free if you are a non-EU citizen, but you have that visa-free access. The big question normally comes later when you want to extend that stay, and then you need to look for a medium-term or a long-term solution. Just before I get into that, I have gone to what I consider the most iconic Schengen border, which is located between Narva in Estonia and Ivangorod in the Russian Federation. So just to roll a quick clip of that from earlier this year when it was super cold and very different to the warm, sunny weather we have right now. And you can see what it's like to get that picturesque shot with the most iconic Schengen border is a backdrop. Tere, so here I am at a real Schengen border. Behind me on this side we have Russia, we have Ivangorod, which is the first city across the river Narva here into Russia, outside the European Union, outside of the Schengen area. And on this side we have Narva, Herman Castle there behind me. So this is the European Union, this is Schengen. And if you look closely, it's probably a bit far away, but you see the bridge just behind me? That is a footbridge, which is actually a border crossing. At the moment, the road crossing here in Narva into Ivangorod and to exit out of Schengen, it is closed due to renovations on the Russian side. It's been closed for about a year. I'm filming this obviously in the winter time. It is January 2025. So at the moment there is only foot traffic. That means that if you want to leave the Schengen area here in Narva and go to Russia outside of the European Union and Schengen, then you need to do so on foot. You're going to have to walk across this footbridge and you will then exit. Obviously not the best situation if you have heavy luggage trudging it through, schlepping it through the snow here in Narva. So now that we're back far away from the chilly vibes of Schengen's border with the Russian Federation, what do you do if you want to stay longer than 90 days every 180 in a part of the Schengen area and you don't have an EU passport? What are the medium and long-term solutions that you should look for? So medium term, you can use some of the loopholes that there are for staying in the Schengen area. And the most common one that I've spoken about a few times before on my channel here is for US citizens with Poland. Now there is an agreement from back in the early 90s through correspondence between diplomats of Poland and the United States that American citizens can spend 90 days visa-free in Poland every time they enter. So that is not limited to 90 days every 180 in the entire Schengen area, even though Poland has since joined Schengen. So in practice, if you were to fly, say, from London to Warsaw as a US citizen, you would get 90 days visa-free in Poland. So you could just fly back out after 90 days. That would also be fine if you hadn't been in Schengen in the previous 180 days. And then you could actually just fly back again afterwards, so each time. So the way this works in practice is that you would have to leave the entire Schengen area, so you can't go from Poland to Germany, for example, after 90 days. Then you would be illegally in the Schengen area while you're in Germany, and you wouldn't have any proof that when you re-enter Poland that you'd actually even left it. So to be safe, you would need to leave the Schengen area. You could do that by traveling also to Ukraine, the country that I'm shooting this clip in, and then you could return to Poland. So for American citizens, that actually allows Americans basically to spend lots of time in excess of the 90 days every 180 in Poland without needing a long-term solution like residency. However, you should be aware that if you were to decide to go to Germany after you've been more than 90 days in the last 180 in Poland, right, in the Schengen area, then you will be illegally in Germany, and if you are stopped by the authorities, then they might decide to deport you and put a ban on your re-entry to the entire Schengen area. So in practice, you would really be limited to staying in Poland and not the rest of the Schengen area if you wanted to play it safe and not risk, being banned, which is, of course, not advisable to end up in that situation. And as I said, there are at times temporary controls on the border between Poland and Germany. So chance of getting caught is actually reasonably high, I would say, if you're to do with that regularly. Now, another more common solution for those that don't have EU citizenship is to do what is being referred to here on YouTube as the Schengen Shuffle, which is you spend your 90 days, let's pick a country where I think this, along with the solution, works pretty well. You decided you want to go to Romania, and you spend 90 days in Romania, and on the 90th day, because you want to abide by the law, you decide to leave, and you hop on a plane and you fly out and you go to the capital of where I started this video, and we're going to end it as well, Chișinău in Moldova, and you enter the territory of Moldova, which is not part of the Schengen area. Moldova is not a member of the EU currently either, although it is an EU candidate country with a target date of 2030. I'll come to that a little bit more in the video about future enlargement of the Schengen area. So when you arrive, you would get 90 days visa-free every 180 in Moldova. That would start the clock new. You could spend 90 days in Moldova, and then you would probably actually have to go, to explain the nuance, for one day somewhere else. You probably actually come here to Odessa in Ukraine, because when you spend the 90 days in Moldova, it would actually be not quite 180 days in total that you would have spent between Schengen, i.e. Romania, and Moldova. It would actually be 179, so you'd actually have to go for one day somewhere else, because they count the first day and the last day that you stay for immigration purposes. They count towards your total, so you'd have spent 90 days in Romania in the Schengen area, and then on that 90th day, it'd also be the first day of your stay in Moldova. So actually, on the 179th day, you're going to have used up your 90 days in Moldova and your 90 days in the Schengen area in Romania, and then you'd have to go for one day somewhere else. You could also fly to London, of course, or somewhere else that's not in the Schengen area, and then, or you can come here to Odessa and then go back to Romania. That way, there's actually a direct line here without having to go back through Moldova from Ukraine into Romania. There are actually many border posts, so that would be a way to deal with it. That is called the Schengen Shuffle. So basically, you just set up your lifestyle so that, and you obviously have to be happy with this, and it doesn't mean you have to go from Romania to Moldova. I'm not necessarily saying that. It just happens that Moldova is one of the countries that is popular with my clients. You could also go to Serbia from Romania. You could also just go somewhere else. You could go back to the States. You could go to the United Kingdom. But generally, if you're looking to live in Europe and have a pretty commensurable experience, and without having to get residency in the Schengen area, you could do that. You could decide to split your time between two European countries, one in Schengen, one that's not in Schengen, and just oscillate between the two. Or you could try to do something seasonal, which is maybe you just hate the cold weather, which is not the case for me personally, but I know for lots of clients that they don't want to be in this part of Europe in the winter, so they could fly to somewhere warm, say Brazil. I love Brazil. And you could spend 90 days in Brazil and then fly back to Europe, and basically, of course, always been careful about that one day that you don't ride back on the day 179 as opposed to the 180. So how they would deal with it, you could do a seasonal, kind of like a migrating bird. You spend it in the warm parts of the year, either in Latin America or Southeast Asia or Africa or somewhere else, that when it's cold here in Europe, it will be warm there. So there are some of the medium-term solutions. And you look for basically a loophole like US citizens have in Poland, or you do the Schengen Shuffle, as it's known as, and you basically manage your time between two locations. For many people, that's going to be fine. They don't actually want to live in one place for more than 3 months at a time. They maybe have their favorite places and they can go between the two, buy two properties in both and then go between them. However, that's not really a great solution because things are going to come up in life and maybe you really want to spend more than 90 days in that country. Maybe you just really love, say, Latvia, or maybe it's going to be Romania or Czechia or someone you really want to spend more time than the 90 days every 180. Then you're going to have to look for residency as a non-EU citizen. Obviously, again, if you're an EU citizen, you don't need to worry about this. You can just move there the next day and all is good. That is a nice segue into the best solution, which is to become an EU citizen. Then you wouldn't have these issues at all. And many Brits and Americans and Canadians and Australians, they have heritage in Europe, in part of the Schengen area and part of the European Union, and they can go and look for what is known as citizenship by descent. Very popular ones are, of course, my home country of Ireland. Ireland used to be a country of emigration, not immigration, so there are just millions of people around the world that could be entitled to Irish citizenship, and is a very popular one to get, especially since Brexit in the United Kingdom. Everybody's looking for their Irish granny. Used to be the way that many footballers, soccer players who were born in England used to qualify to play for the Irish national team, was the granny rule. They just happened to have a grandmother who was from the island of Ireland, and you can go and do that. Other popular ones that I've seen with clients are Romania, Germany, and Ireland. They would be the top three that I see. Italy is now talking about changing their laws, so that used to be a reasonably popular one as well from friends and clients in terms of looking for some ancestry. If you don't qualify for citizenship by descent, then you should look at getting a residency permit in one of the countries of the Schengen area. And there are many ways to do that. You can go as a student, you could be employed there. There's some countries allow you to get residency if you invest. Others, it can be actually just investing in real estate, not necessarily in a business. And within this region that I help my clients with in terms of relocation in general, which I dub New Europe, the most popular and common is through real estate investment in Latvia. There it is pretty straightforward. You invest 250,000 euros into certain types of properties, and then you can apply for a temporary residence permit. After 5 years, you get your permanent residency permit, and after you've gone another 5 years in that, you can even apply for Latvian citizenship. You would need to be able to speak Latvian at that point, but you would have a decade to do so. So you need to go and look for a way to get residency in one of the member states of Schengen, of the Schengen area. And there are lots and lots of ways to do that. Some of my other clients have gotten it in Romania, also Bulgaria, in addition to looking at the options in the Baltic states like Latvia and Lithuania. Poland is, of course, a very popular destination amongst Americans and Brits, I guess, nowadays, definitely for tourism and also for staying longer term, in large part because they have that medium-term solution with the loophole, basically allowing US citizens to stay there. However, I do know of other nationalities going and getting Polish residency, so that would allow you to stay in that country. You would have to be resident in that country, which means spending the majority of your time there in that country and actually having a real purpose to be there. However, there are lots of ways to achieve that. So if you are looking for advice about, in part, how to stay longer in the Schengen area, then you can look down below at my consultancy services. I help guys with setting up their dream lifestyles in this part of Europe that I dub New Europe. So it just doesn't only include using my previous legal expertise and nous with respect to getting visas and residency, but also other parts of your lifestyle, like designing cultural integration, relationships, and of course also investing in real estate, which can help you, of course, also gain residency in some countries, like I said, in Latvia. And I'll actually put a video to a recent video that I shot about investing in real estate with the aim of gaining residency in Latvia. It's well worth checking out. Go and look at both of those links down below in the description to this video and up above in the card for that real estate video. So as this video is being shot in August 2025, you should be aware of some potential changes on the horizon. One is the introduction of the ETIAS, I guess it's ETIAS, which is a little bit like the ETSA for going as a non-US citizen like if you're coming from most European countries to the US, it's basically you're going to have to fill out an online application and pay a pretty trivial fee every couple of years in order to be streamlined and be allowed to use your visa free. So that would be the 90 days every 180 within the Schengen area. That has been on the cards to come into force for many years. And when I'm speaking from right now, they're talking about it basically towards the end of 2026. However, it has been delayed already a few times, so whether it ever happens or not, obviously can't say, and I'm not very sure that it ever will, but definitely go and check that in due course if you're watching this video in the future. Also, there is a concept called the EES, which will be the entry and exit system, and that will get away with those having those stamps, which a lot of people like, getting the stamp in their passport when you enter the Schengen area in the future when you come through the Schengen border, the external border, and that is due to also come into effect in 2026. However, it was supposed to come into force in the past and it never happened as well. So whether both of these initiatives actually come to fruition is unclear to me at this point, and it has been delayed already several times. However, make sure that you keep abreast of the developments and just do a quick search for them to be updated if you haven't been back in Europe for a while and you decide to come to the Schengen area. Would be good not to be caught out by that. I've seen people in other situations get caught out by changes in the rules, so just make sure that if you haven't been back for a while that you go and double check all that good stuff, that you're allowed come unimpeded into the Schengen area if you are coming as a tourist. And the Schengen area may expand in the future. And I did mention back earlier in this video the two members of the European Union that are not currently part of Schengen, which are Cyprus and Republic of Ireland. So Cyprus has actually got a target date of joining Schengen in 2026. Again, just like with the EES and the ETIAS, this might not actually ever happen, or it could happen in 2026. So just check that, especially if you are looking at doing the Schengen shuffle as it's known and going out to Cyprus. You may discover that in the meantime it's actually become a member of Schengen, and that would be a huge mistake to make, because then it would not mean that you're outside the Schengen area. You may actually exceed your 90 days every 180. Cyprus has geopolitical issue. That means that the authorities in Nicosia have not been in de facto control of northern parts of the island for, I think it's almost like 50 years at this point. However, they are looking at joining the Schengen area, so definitely read up to that, about that, if you are going to go to Cyprus at any stage from 2026 onwards, because they may have already joined Schengen. There might be some nuances that you need to know about going there. I've been once to the island myself. And the other country, of course, is one I know pretty well. It's my home country, Ireland. And Ireland has a border on the island because we have Northern Ireland, which is a part of the United Kingdom, and we have the Republic of Ireland, which is not part of the United Kingdom and is actually part of the European Union, but is not currently part of Schengen, in part because if they were to join Schengen, they would actually have to put a hard physical border on the island, and because of the history of the island, they don't want to do that at the current juncture. Quite understandable. There is then a post-Brexit agreement on what happens on the island of Ireland. For your purposes in terms of visiting Ireland in the future, there may be a referendum in Northern Ireland and in the Republic of Ireland about actually unifying together. In that case, Northern Ireland would leave the United Kingdom and unify with the Republic of Ireland, which would mean, if we look at East and West Germany, when they joined, basically Northern Ireland would be in the European Union as part of this unified Irish state, and at that point Ireland may consider joining Schengen, because they would no longer involve having to put a hard border on the island anymore. However, that is not something that is likely to happen in the short term for the purposes of you probably watching this video. But if something unexpected happens and they suddenly unified, then be aware of those changes. Also, some new countries may join the European Union and then look to join Schengen. Countries that are EU candidate countries like Montenegro, for example, they have neighboring Croatia that is a member of the Schengen area and the European Union, so they may actually very quickly after joining the European Union apply to join Schengen, and that might happen very quickly. It's a small country, Montenegro, so not likely to see some of the political issues that we saw with, say, Romania and Bulgaria when they joined the EU in 2007, and then it took a long time for them to actually join the Schengen area. It was actually in earlier this year, in 2025, they fully joined basically. So other countries that are EU candidate countries are one I mentioned earlier, Moldova, not expected to join. They have a target date of 2030, so it will probably be at least then before they would join. Montenegro may join the European Union by 2028. That is their unofficial target date for now. And other countries like here in Ukraine, they would desire to join the European Union and Schengen at some point in the future. However, that is not on the cards for right now. So those are some of the changes to be aware of that may possibly happen with respect to the Schengen area. That has been the primer video on Schengen, and coming here and finding a medium to long-term solution for staying in the area and the region legally if you are a non-EU citizen. And as I said, the most popular Schengen area countries that I help my clients with are Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Maybe it's also going to be Romania and Czechia in the future, let's see. And I'm helping them also with non-Schengen countries like this one, Moldova, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. Drop your questions and your comments down below if there's some points that you would like quickly clarified, or you've had some experience with crossing the borders in Schengen that were unusual, and you have some maybe anecdotes about maybe you've even overstayed your 90 days every 180, you'd like to share that. Drop all that good stuff down below in the comments section to this video. So whether you decide to come to the Schengen area or a country that is on the path to becoming an EU member, like here in Moldova, and eventually thereafter presumably to join Schengen, when you arrive, you're going to need to know where to go. What are going to be the best places in the city? What am I, as the insider for this region, as I'm known as by my clients, where does the insider hang out? What are the best cafes, restaurants, etc. that you can meet the cool kids of the city, maybe the beautiful women, the high-level businessmen, all that great stuff. I have put together my secret spots in New York. I've got a few cities covered there, some in Schengen, some outside Schengen. Shh, these are my secret spots. And you can get that for free. It's a PDF down below in the video description. So that will be very useful for you when you show up, save you a lot of time. And we've got a beautiful, beautiful sunset just behind me here in the center of Chișinău. And I'm going to bid you o seară plăcută, o seară bună, and la revedere. See you in another video. Papa from Chișinău, the capital of Moldova. Ciao.